Hi, my name is Bey Logan. Welcome to the Hong Kong Legends DVD of Once Upon a Time in China 3. The Cantonese title of the film is Wong Fei-hung. If we're being very polite, it's Wong Fei-hung Ji Sam. Or if we're talking like regular people, it's Wong Fei-hung Dai Sam Jap, Wong Fei-hung number 3. And the subtitle of the film is Si Wong Jan Bat. Si Wong means Lion King, and Jan Bat is contest. So it's Wong Fei-hung 3, the Lion King contest. And it was released in Hong Kong on the 2nd of November 1993. And I'm sure, as many of you are aware, it's the third film in this epic series that Tsui Hark has produced and directed, in the main is directed, featuring the most long-lasting and prolific of the southern Chinese martial arts folk heroes, Wong Fei-hung. And what makes this film very different in style and tone from the first two films is it was shot entirely on location in Beijing, or at the Beijing studios, whereas the other two films were shot in Hong Kong, and brought Jet Li, the star of the films, back to his hometown, which is Beijing. And here we see the Dowager Empress, who is a key figure in this movie. So we should talk a bit about her. Let's talk a bit about the history and the period in which the film is set. We're now in the last part of the last century, and it's the Qing dynasty in China, with this Dowager Empress ruling. And the Dowager Empress, her real name was Yehunala, and she was a member of the Manchu race. And the Manchu were like nomadic invaders from the northeast of China. And they had taken over overthrown the previous dynasty, the Ming dynasty, and imposed their own Qing dynasty on the whole of what is today modern China. When she came to power, through means we'll discuss in a moment, she took on another name, which was Tsui, which means kindly and virtuous. And you can interpret that as you will. There's actually a wonderful book about her life by Sterling Seagrave called Dragon Lady, which will give you even more background detail into the life and rule of the Dowager Empress. She was 16 years old when she became a concubine of the Qing Emperor, Xianfeng. And she was the only one of a concubine is like an unmarried mistress or a woman in the harem of an emperor in China. So she was a concubine of Xianfeng, and she was actually the only one of the concubines to bear him a son. And because China remains to this day very much a patriarchy, having male children was important to continue the line, and you wanted to have an emperor to rule China. So the fact that she was the one that bore him a son, that raised her position in the imperial household. Then Xianfeng himself died in 1861 at the age of only 30, which meant that Tzuchi's 5-year-old son, Tongqi, became the emperor with her in the place of regent. So she became the Dowager Empress, being a woman ruling China on behalf of this child who'd yet to reach his maturity. So effectively, she was ruling China. And during this time, the Western powers had increasing influence in China, and it was during her reign or her rule over China the famous Boxer Rebellion happened. Tsui Hark's very careful with this film. He never actually specifically sets a date for the events. My own feeling from watching the film a couple of times is that it's probably set after the Boxer Rebellion, because you see that after the Boxer Rebellion had failed, the Boxer Rebellion was an uprising. It's called the Boxer Rebellion because many of the people rising up against the Westerners, the Chinese people, were martial arts experts. And if you see the movie 59 Days at Peking with Charlton Heston, that's a very biased, kind of jingoistic view from the Western viewpoint of the siege of Peking, when the embassies in China, the embassies that were opened and run by the Western powers, were besieged by these rising Boxers, by these local patriots. And after the Boxer Rebellion had been brutally put down, there was increasingly a Western influence and power. And so when we see this movie, we see that in the shot you just saw, this whole line of visiting dignitaries treated with great respect, and an increasing amount of technology, the idea that Western technology is going to change China forever. So I would place this just after the Boxer Rebellion. And the Boxer Rebellion happened in 1900, which is problematic for the history of the film, because we have two major characters, Wong Fei-hung, played by Jet Li, and Wong Fei-hung's father, Wong Kei-Ying, played by Lao Shun. And we know that Wong Kei-Ying died in 1886, which means that he obviously could not have been physically in Beijing at the time of the events we see in this film. And Wong Fei-hung was born in 1847, which means that he would have been in his 50s, getting up towards 60, and obviously Jet Li's far younger than that. But as the saying goes, it's only a movie, and what Tsui Hark has done is take all these wonderful pages from history and paint a new vision, a new bright vision onto them, incorporating these wonderful folk heroes. For a matter of fact, we don't have any evidence that either Wong Fei-hung or his father, Wong Kei-Ying, ever went to Beijing. And I think in this instance, having done two very successful Wong Fei-hung films, Tsui Hark needed to go onto new ground for the third one, and he had an opportunity to film in Beijing, to shoot actually on location this wonderful Forbidden City, and to use the magnificent Beijing film studios. And it was a question of coming up with this spectacle that would really lend itself to that kind of backdrop. And he decided, fine, we're going to have these heroes be in this place in time at this moment for the story to work. So the history of the piece is secondary. But apart from the fact that the two characters couldn't have been there at that time in the form that we see them in this film, the history, the background history, is very well observed. And we do see the situation in China and the idea that persists throughout the Tsui Hark Once Upon a Time in China series, of a China that's in a perpetual state of change, that is, in the time that he's examining, about to make a transition from this ancient feudal society into a modern power. And some people would say that that struggle is still continuing to this day. And here, a shot that I'm tempted to think is left over from Once Upon a Time in China 2, which also began with a train ride for our heroes. Here we are at the main Beijing railway station, and this wonderful standing set here at the Beijing Film Studios. These were the same studios at which Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was shot. And they boast these 4 wonderful sound stages. I mean, sound stages is a misnomer. They hardly ever shoot sync sound on these films. But these wonderful stages there, which you can put in this kind of scope with thousands of extras. And they also shot Farewell My Concubine, and before that, The Last Emperor was also shot here. And here our main characters coming in: Wong Fei-hung, played by Jet Li, and his student Leung Fun, played by Max Mok Soo-jong. And they, as you see, Max's Leung Fun is obviously trying to emulate Jet Li, emulate Wong Fei-hung, because they're dressed, exactly the same with these funny boaters and the dark glasses, something that we first saw Jet Li wearing in the very first Wong Fei-hung film. And we have this dichotomy, I think, of Chinese people becoming westernized and Westerners learning Chinese customs. Here is the Russian character, Tumanovsky, who's played by John Wakefield, who's an American. He's actually from Lincoln, Nebraska. And both he and the film's director, Tsui Hark, are alumni of the University of Texas, which had nothing to do with John getting the part in the film. He's actually fluent in Cantonese and was speaking Cantonese on the set. And in the film, his character is meant to be a Russian linguist, loosely based on a real figure who was living in Beijing at the turn of that century. And one thing I like about John is he actually looks like an actor, and he turns in a performance. All too often in Hong Kong movies, including the Tsui Hark films, they've obviously gone down to Chungking Mansions and brought out anybody who wants to be in a film for a couple of $100 Hong Kong dollars a day, and you can tell. With John, he's somebody who actually came to Hong Kong with the view of being an actor and took what he was doing quite seriously. You can actually see him in the opening scene of Jackie Chan's movie Police Story 3, Super Cop. He plays a police officer in that. And he was in a bunch of other movies. He's an actor rather than a martial artist. There was originally, in the original script, there was a plan that the Tumanovsky character would fight Jet Li at the end, and he would be using a kind of a Russian cavalry officer's sword, and Jet Li would be fighting with a straight sword or some other Chinese bladed weapon. And it was obvious as they proceeded with the film that even though John looks the part and he's a fine actor, he's not a martial arts person, so it really wouldn't be workable to have that. So the ending was changed. And I think it was a good choice, though, because he's somebody where you can believe that this character, Tumanovsky, when he was studying with 13th Aunt, Sapsamyi, played by the beautiful Rosamund Kwan Chi-lam, that there could have been some kind of romantic stirrings between them, partly, I think, influenced by her fascination with things Western. So it was a good casting in that regard, whereas probably if you would have had a martial arts guy, he could have done the action sequence at the end, but maybe couldn't have brought in some of the subtleties of the character. Now we get the usual Leung Fun activity in the film. Leung Fun's main job is to cause trouble that Wong Fei-hung has to come in and take care of. Here in this film, he's played by Mok Soo-jong. In the very first film in the series, the Leung Fun character was played by Yun Bu. And Yun Bu was apparently dissatisfied with the amount of screen time he got and the amount of action he got to do in the film, and so he declined to return for the sequels. So Mok Soo-jong got to play the same role for the next few films and on into the TV series. The real-life Leung Fun died very young, and this event is actually depicted in one of the old black-and-white Wong Fei-hung films, in which Kwan Tak-hing played Wong Fei-hung, and the character of Leung Fun was played by a veteran called Cho Dat-wah, who's somebody who's been in hundreds of different films. So we get a quick chance there to see the physical grace of Wong Fei-hung. And we're now at the Cantonese Association elsewhere in Beijing. In fact, it's actually splendid interior at the Beijing Film Studios, and all the lion heads are up there on the ceiling. And later in the film, I'll talk to you a bit about the nature of lion dancing, and that sign there talking about the glorious lion heads of Canton. Obviously, Beijing has been of major importance throughout Chinese history. It became the capital in the Yuan dynasty from 1271 to 1368. Here that Marco Polo met Kublai Khan. Now the introduction of Wong Kei-Ying, father of Wong Fei-hung, played by this wonderful fellow, Lao Shan. I don't know why he wasn't nominated for Best Supporting Actor at the Hong Kong Film Awards for his performance here. He was nominated for his performance in another Tsui Hark produced film, Swordsman. This little thing here, dotting the I's, this is actually he's not bringing the lion awake here, but when you actually wake up the lion to perform the lion dance, you dot paint, normally red paint, onto the eyes and face, and that breathes the spirit into the lion before you actually begin the lion dance. Obviously, lion dancing is a major element of this film, and probably one reason why Western audiences have felt a little distanced from the movie by the fact that so much of it is about this rather arcane practice. So later on, when we see some lion dancing, I'll try to introduce some of the elements to try to make it a little bit more familiar to people who maybe are not aware of what lion dancing is. And Wong Kei-Ying is kind of a folk hero in his own right, also born in Saichu village in Nam Hoi, and we don't have an actual date of birth for him, but it was round about the start of the 19th century. And as a youngster, he performed as a street acrobat. And he was, in most versions of his life story, we have him being noticed by a Hanga or Hongkyun martial arts master called Luk Ah Choi. And Luk Ah Choi took him on as a student. Some other versions have the father of Wong Kei-Ying, Wong Tai, as the student of Luk Ah Choi, and him teaching Wong Kei-Ying. And Wong Kei-Ying went on to become an instructor of the Cantonese Black Flag Militia, and this is a position that Wong Fei-hung inherited. It has to be said that apart from the very bare bones of the life of Wong Kei-Ying and of Wong Fei-hung, we don't really have any hard historical evidence, and a lot of it is folk story, a lot of it is hearsay. As William Randolph Hearst memorably said, if you have a choice between the truth and the legend, you print the legend, and that's what these films are doing. There are various elements of the the Wong family archives seem to be kind of interchangeable. I mean, various stories have said that Wong Kei-Ying is one of the 10 tigers of Canton, the Gongdong Sapfu, and the Kam Na Sao here, which is I like this use of the stance and the Kam Na Sao, the grappling hands, because there's a lot of movements in these films which are on wires and very extravagant, but that stance, the interception there with the stance technique followed up by the grappling hands is a very classical Hung style, whereas the jumping kicks, it tends to be more of the northern style. I mean, Chinese martial arts are divided into Lam Kun, Bak Toi. Lam Kun being southern fist, Bak Toi being northern leg. And talking of northern leg, here's our man Hung Yan Yan as Greiger Chut, or clubfoot, as he is in the translation. It's not very accurate. The translation, Greiger Chut, is like strange leg 7, meaning really he's the 7th child of his father's lineage, and he has like a strange leg, and he's the chosen fighter of the rickshaw pullers who are here to challenge the Canton Men's Association. And the actor, Hon Yan Yan, he actually is a wushu champion and been a wushu practitioner in his own right, and worked as a stunt double for Jet Li right from the early days of the first Shaolin Temple movie, Siu Lam Ji. And he also came to Hong Kong, and he worked as Jet's main double on the first of the Wong Fei-hung films, Once Upon a Time in China. And, of course, as many people may be aware, Jet was very severely injured on that film, so most of the action in the finale is actually Hong Yan Yan doubling for Jet Li for Lei Ling Git. And then in the second movie, Once Upon a Time in China 2, Hong Yan Yan had a good part in front of the camera, playing the White Lotus chief, and you can see him at the beginning of the film, and he has a great duel with Jet using his kind of sanda, his internal and his spirit energy. And then they brought him out for this film, and it really made his name as an on-screen performer. And he went on to reprise this role in Once Upon a Time in China 4 and 5, and in the Wong Fei-hung TV series that Tsui Hark produced, and then again in Once Upon a Time in China and America. And he moved on from that to working in international pictures. He was the action choreographer in Double Team and had a fight with Van Damme, Jean-Claude Van Damme, in that film. Went on to work in the same capacity on Simon Says with Dennis Rodman, and most recently had his biggest success with The Musketeer, which was this modern version of the Three Musketeers, this kind of D'Artagnan. I say modern in that the action style was kind of Hong Kong style action, but with épée, with the fencing foils. For some reason in the West, he's sometimes given this, his name is like Xin Xin Xiong, Xin which I find most Western people have understandably, Western people have a tough time pronouncing Chinese names anyway, and sometimes the phonetic, the kind of romanization, the pinyin romanization is no help at all. I find myself, Hong Yan Yan is much easier to say, and particularly as these are like Cantonese films, they're Hong Kong productions, so it makes better sense to use his Cantonese name, Hong Yan Yan. But he is in Mandarin Xin Xin Xiong. I'm reliably informed. Just want to mention at this point, there's actually several versions of Once Upon a Time in China 3. And the one you're watching is the only one that really survives in its in a state where you could put it out as a pristine DVD. I have got a very blurry video copy of the Taiwanese print, which runs slightly longer. There's not much, there's no extra action in the film, but there's more drama, and some scenes are longer. I mean, the scene we just saw with the journey from the railway station to the Canton Men's Association, we actually see them along the way, and there's like more traveling shots that really show Wong Fei-hung in Beijing traveling from place to place. And some of the dramatic scenes are slightly longer. And people always ask me, well, how come, Golden Harvest or Film Workshop don't have all these different versions catalogued and all the extra footage kept to put into DVDs? The reality is, for many years, up until 1993 when this film was made, Hong Kong film or Chinese film was viewed as a disposable commodity. You brought a film out, perhaps in different versions for different markets in Asia. The film made its money back. You did sales to TV and to video. I mean, we didn't really have DVD coming in at that time. And that was it. And so there was no sense of the fact that, these films have a longer shelf life, and the idea that major Hollywood studios or that major British distributors would come in and say, by the way, do you have the 110-minute, 120-minute version? No one understandably, had the foresight to look ahead and say, maybe someday this extra footage will be valuable. And so a lot of it's been thrown away, or it's was stored in such a way that it being celluloid film in the very humid temperatures of Asia, it wasn't preserved very well. So for that reason, the longer versions don't really exist in a form where you can put them onto DVD. But there are different tapes, and if you're a collector, as I am, I know many of the collectors spend a lot of time acquiring different versions of the film. But I will, as we go through the movie, I may point out where there's extra scenes were in the film, and maybe some stage in the future, if we ever find a really clean print of the longer version, there'll be a reissue of Once Upon a Time in China 3. And I very well remember when the first film came out, there was some complaints that Jet Li was too young to play a man who was meant to be a Sifu, who was being deferred to by much older people in the film as like Wong Sifu. And that, of course, by the time the third film came out, that really wasn't an issue, because he'd put into the role so much authority and calmness and patience that his performance inspired respect. So you never really stop and think, why is this very young-looking man getting respect from all the people, as in this sequence where he's really ordering everybody around, and he's obviously held in great respect and fear by his students and by the people around him. It's really a testament to Jet Li, not as a martial artist, but as an actor, that he brought that kind of gravitas to the role. As I mentioned earlier, at the time this film is set, the real Wong Fei-hung would have been in his late 50s. We know he was born 9th of July and lived from 1847 to 1925. And he actually died on the 25th of March at the Sai Fong Ping Hospital in Canton. This is based on my own researches. I have to say that there is a lot of hearsay, and if you have different information or you've heard different versions from your martial arts instructor, then please choose whichever version of the story you prefer to believe in. But I hear all different, and in researching these DVD commentaries, you always find different versions of the life of a great hero like Wong Fei-hung. But based on what I have understood, his birth name was actually Wong Sek-cheung, but later was he took on the name Wong Fei-hung, Fei-hong being like a flying bird. So this, I think, was a reflection of his father's intention that he become or his instructor's intention that he become a martial arts master. So he became Wong Fei-hung, and the name became legend. There's different versions of how Wong Fei-hung became a student of martial arts. In some versions, he's taught directly by his father, Wong Kei-Ying. In others, this is played out in a very good Shaw Brothers movie called Challenge of the Masters, Wong Fei-hung and Luk Ah-choi. Wong Fei-hung's father refuses to teach him because he wants his son to become a scholar, not to become a martial arts master. And so Luk Ah-choi, the father's instructor, takes on Wong Fei-hung as a student. Then you have another film like Iron Monkey, like Teet Ma Lao, in which you have the very young Wong Fei-hung following his father. And it's evident that it's a direct line of transmission that Wong Fei-hung is training his son in the martial arts. So you pay your money, take your choice. But the character on the left here, Wong Kei-Ying, played by the wonderful Lao Shen. This character has been played by various people at various times. In Drunken Master, the first Drunken Master movie, where Jackie Chan played Wong Fei-hung, Wong Kei-Ying is played by this veteran Shaw Brothers actor called Lam Kao. And then in Drunken Master 2, some years later, a remarkable bit of casting, Dick Lung, another Shaw Brothers player, who's actually round about the same age, just a couple of years older than Jackie, got to play Wong Kei-Ying to Jackie's Wong Fei-hung for Drunken Master 2, Joy Kyun Dai Yi. And not that anybody really cares that much, but in Drunken Master 3, the father of Wong Fei-hung is played by Adam Cheng, who is a swordplay actor and one of the stars of Zhu, Warriors from the Magic Mountain, or Suksan. But probably the most famous Wong Kei-Ying of our day is Donnie Yen, who plays the role in Iron Monkey and Teet Ma Lao, which became a surprise hit when re-released by Miramax in the States. And it just shows that, I think there's an old saying that fashion dates, but style doesn't. And I think Iron Monkey was evidence that that style would still work, even though the movie was almost 10 years old. This is the Industrial Revolution coming to Bo Chi Lam, which is the famous herbal medicine clinic. Now, actually, Bo Chi Lam, which is famous now as being the martial arts school and the medical clinic of Wong Fei-hung, was actually established by Luk Ah-choi, who is the instructor of Wong Kei-Ying. I should say, that traditionally martial arts instructors did not open commercial schools like we have today. They would be primarily herbal medicine doctors, and they'd be dispensing bruise medicine, da jiao, and for injuries and curing bone and muscle ailments, and teaching kung fu almost as a sideline. It was considered it wasn't really good form to teach martial arts for money. That this precious art was going to be communicated from father to son or from master to student. I mean, there's a saying that a sifu for a day is like a father for 1,000 years, and there's the first kiss between these two characters. And one thing I like about the fact that Tsui Hark did this whole run of Once Upon a Time in China 1, 2, and 3 is the fact that he got to develop this romance step by step between these two star-crossed lovers. And normally in films, there's especially in Hong Kong movies, there's a very abrupt transition where you have a romance happening to satisfy the gentler side of the audience. Here, Tsui Hark took 3 films to develop it, and I think one of the stronger elements of this film is the resolution of the romance and the way that it reflects the changing society in China, because of they're not blood relatives, but because of the complexities of Chinese relations, this woman Peony is actually the aunt of Wong Fei-hung. So according to ancient tradition, they should not be allowed to have any kind of intimate relationship. He should treat her as his senior, as if she was an old auntie. And the idea of them getting married is quite a shock to the system. A nice little moment here for Rosamund Kwan, because she says, every time he goes into action, I'm terrified. But her acting, the way she watches, you don't feel that. I think she kind of likes it. And come on, ladies, wouldn't you love it if your boyfriend could go into action the way that Jet Li's Wong Fei-hung does. I mean, he's so, we say in Cantonese, so yao ying. He's so smart. So I think she kind of likes it, but she says, it terrifies me when he goes into action like this. The action choreographer for the first two films was the Yun clan, was Yun Mo-ping and his brother Yun Chen-yan. For this movie, it was a changing of the guard, and we had one of the other Yun clan, Yun Bun, who was a former upper school classmate of Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung, the toughest-looking man on the block. I mean, you can see him on camera in Dragon Gate Inn and Hero Never Dies, and he also did choreography for Tsui Hark's film Do, The Blade, and went on to work on this series, Once Upon a Time in China 5. And he's a former member of the Chut Seven Little Fortunes, who are the people training in Chinese opera school. He's not connected to... A lot of people have kind of been confused, understandably, by the name Yun. There's actually two groups of Yuns working as action choreographers in Hong Kong. There's the... And in the West now, of course, in Hollywood too. There's the Yun Mo-ping Yuns, who are like the sons of Yun Xiu-tian, who are Yun Mo-ping, Yun Chen-yan, Yun Shen-yi. And then there's the Seven Little Fortunes, the Yun Bu's, Yun Kui, Yun Dak, Yun Bun. These are all the students of Sifu Yu Jim Yun, who was the instructor of Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung. And they all took half of his given name, Yun, as a stage name. But there's no connection between the two groups. For Yun Mo-ping, Yun is a surname, and for Yun Bu and Yun Bun, this Yun is actually a taker name. It's a stage name, part of the first name, the forename of their master. And I like this little scenario here because it really is, if you've ever been involved with the martial arts world, you always get these different sifus who want to see their students mix it up, but they never want to get in the fray themselves. They always want to stand back and let other people go into action for them. So now Jet comes out and says, fine, no need to get everybody hot and bothered and exchanging blows, because you claim that they've stolen your students. We'll settle it mano a mano. So now this guy's been confronted, and there are people watching, and so he's a martial arts master. He has to come out. And I really like this. It's not a long, protracted action sequence. The guy's coming forward, and just one technique, boom, timing, like knowing when to cut. It's the old swordplay thing. Real speed, real power is knowing when to cut, which is a principle of martial art. And Tsui Hark, though not a martial artist himself, is somebody who has taken on board all the principles of martial art. There's quite a moment here, and they can tell they're not his match. There's no need to fight any further. So by virtue of his skill, Wong Fei-hung has brought peace. And this to me is like the highest level of martial art, which is when he comes out and will stop fighting and will stop unnecessary suffering by his superior skill. And probably this is the heart of what Chinese martial arts should be about. On the movies, not to shatter anybody's illusions, Jet worked with 3 different doubles on each of the first 3 of the Once Upon a Time in China films. On the first, as I mentioned earlier, he was doubled by Hong Yan, and probably on that movie he was doubled the most because of the injury that meant that, they had a delivery date for the film, so they had to finish the film by a certain date, and so he had to be doubled by Hong Yan. On the second film, there was a guy called Didi who remains his double to this day and works with him. It looks very much like Jet, so he still works with him in Hollywood. And on this movie, it was a gentleman called Alan Lan, also known as Jai Jai, who's the son of another famous producer called Lan Tian-hong. It was actually my flatmate when we worked on Highbinders in Dublin. And this is a nice, quiet scene. You always feel the weight of history on these lion heads, because that weight of history is what would prevent a marriage between Wong Fei-hung and Sapsam Yi and Peony. So she's feeling, at this stage, oppressed by that. And, of course, Wong Kei-Ying has no idea that this is what they've come back to Beijing to tell him. He's retired to Beijing, and Wong Fei-hung has come to confess, by the way, I'm in love with my auntie, and we plan to get married. Look at Jet Li. It's an amazing life that he's had. I mean, he's a Beijing native, born there, began training at the Beijing Sports and Exercise School, as it's now known, became the China national champion and became a movie star. And originally, when he was up for casting for the first Shaolin Temple movie, people said, oh, he's a bit short, he's a bit small. But his action was so perfect, and his look, it really kind of fit the description for a new Chinese hero. And that was a huge hit, revived the fortunes of Shaolin Temple, and he became a huge star. And here we are in the Forbidden City, and it's wonderful to be able to take the Wong Fei-hung series out of the studio setting of the first two movies and here actually into Beijing, into these fabulous buildings that have remained the same down through the centuries. Most of modern Beijing was actually built during the Ming Dynasty, which lasted from 1368 to 1644. And this movie is set during the Qing, which is from 1644 to 1911, subsequent to which was the foundation of the Republic, and subsequent to that, in 1949, the founding of modern China, and also the establishment of the Beijing Film Studios, where much of this movie was shot. And here you have the wonderful architecture of the Forbidden City, which I don't think you could reproduce on a soundstage for love or money. And they obviously had complete freedom to go in. There was a big budget production. They had freedom to go in and to work within these huge walls. These will be familiar to you. Remember Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon running up and down the walls? I mean, obviously this is kind of the same kind of setting, and that film was shot in much of the same locations as this one is. And a great line when Wong Fei-hung's walking away, and he says, even when they give an answer, there may be no answer. Really a reference to the politics of China at the turn of the last century. And indeed, could be a veiled reference to the state of play as things are today, because you do have, in terms of dealing with mainland authorities, there's a certain amount of red tape, literal red tape that you have to go through. And the setting up now the only real confrontation between Wong Fei-hung and the main fighting villain of the piece, who is Greiger Chut, played by Hong Yan-yan. And people have said about this film that they felt that there wasn't enough hand-to-hand fighting. My feeling is that coming into the project, Tsui Hark looked at the first two films, and the first movie you have this incredible Kun Sao, like Kun Gek, the hands and fist fighting between Jet Li and Yam Sai-kun at the end of the first film, and then the incredible weapons fights between Jet Li and Yan Qidan in Wong Fei-hung number 2. So you weren't really going to be able to top that in the third movie. So he thought, we'll have a spectacular location, and we'll do the line dancing and try to do something different to what's been seen in the first couple of movies. But this little moment, I like the fact that what there is of action in the film, Yun Bun did a very good job and actually provided a worthy adversary for Wong Fei-hung in this film. And you do realize in this scene that even though he has prodigious fighting skill and did indeed beat the aging Wong Kei-Ying, that Greiger Chut is no match for Wong Fei-hung. You have to establish this because later in the film and later in the series, he becomes like the student of Wong Fei-hung. So if it wasn't for the fact that Wong Fei-hung had superior martial arts fighting ability, then the logic of that will not work. So there's the Mo Yin Gek, the kick without shadow. Boom! And he's flying back. And then, because of his first concern has to be for the love of his life, there's Wong Fei-hung is off and running. Now, the character of Sup Sam Yi, a lot of people have asked me, is she based on Mok Wai Lan, who was like the most famous of Wong Fei-hung's real-life wives? And I feel that she's kind of a composite of the different women in the life, supposedly in the life of the real Wong Fei-hung. He first married, according to legend, to a woman with the surname of Lo in like 1871, but she died very young and that marriage had no issue. He married again in 1896 to a woman with the surname Ma, and they had 2 daughters and 2 sons. She died, and we're not really sure what happened to the children of that marriage. Later, in 1902, he married a woman named Sam, and she bore him 2 sons, Wong Hon-siu and Wong Hon-hei. And this wife also died. And you have to wonder why anybody would come back up to bat. He had such a bad track record in terms of the longevity of his spouse. But he married this lady called Mok Wai Lan, who was just 19 when she married him, and he was already an elderly man. And so she outlived him for many years and actually came to live in Hong Kong and was a martial arts advisor on the black and white Wong Fei-hung films, and is supposedly, when Quan Tai-hing was cast as Wong Fei-hung, she came and gave him her blessing and said, you look just like my late husband. And so there was a sense of continuity. And there's a famous photograph of the first day of filming of the first of the black and white Wong Fei-hung movies, where you see Mok Wai Lan and one of the sons of Wong Fei-hung on the set. I'm presuming there must be descendants of Wong Fei-hung living in Hong Kong still, but if so, they certainly have not made themselves known or exploited the family name. There is a line of Bo Chi Lam herbal medicine or herbal soup stores, but they're run by the descendants of the late Kwan Tat Hing. There's some magnificent fake whiskers on the cheeks there of John Wakefield. John actually still lives in Hong Kong, but he mainly does other business. I met him the other day, and he's still up for doing film roles. And he's a pretty good actor, so I think maybe we should find something for him to do. He had a pretty rough ride of it on this film. He said it was very cold filming in Beijing, and Tsui Hark runs a tough set, it has to be said. I think in some ways he's got a similar reputation and a similar directing style to someone like Michael Bay or James Cameron, who produce magnificent films, but most people say, particularly in the case of James Cameron, you read stories that it's not necessarily the greatest working experience of your life. And I think definitely with Tsui Hark, him and Ringo Lam used to have a reputation as being like, they used to call them the dark-faced gods, in that they used to run a pretty tough set. And this tension used to filter down from him, from the director, to his assistant directors, down to the other runners on the film, to the cast. And John says, it was pretty tough, and you would get shouted at if things weren't going the way that the director wanted them to go. Wong Fei-hung legend. Part of the reason I think that Wong Fei-hung has managed to be has been reinterpreted to the extent that he has over the years, and we just had a cartoon version which shows that you can actually do any kind of Wong Fei-hung that you want, is that what we're about to see actually never happened, that the real Wong Fei-hung was never captured on film or on camera, and so people could reinterpret the legend any way they chose, and so he could take on the face of Kwan Tat Hing or Jackie Chan or Jet Li. The reason given for the fact that we have no records of Wong Fei-hung, but given that he was alive well in the time when in China there was portraits being painted and photographs being taken, the reason that we don't have any images of him is apparently that the original Bo Chi Lam was burnt to the ground in 1924, taking with it all the photographs, paintings, relics of the real Wong Fei-hung. Recently, there was a photograph of somebody purported to be the photograph of the real Wong Fei-hung was circulated in the Hong Kong magazines, but Grandmaster Lam Zhou, the adopted son of the late Lam Sai-wing, the most famous of Wong Fei-hung students, the man who brought Hung Gar to Hong Kong, Lam Zhou says that is a photograph of the fourth son of Wong Fei-hung, Wong Hon-hei. And actually Lam Zhou knew Wong Hon-hei, so I guess he would recognize him. I myself felt when I saw the picture that it looked a lot more like the son of Wong Fei-hung, the person who visited the set on the very first day of filming of the first Wong Fei-hung movie, than it did look like somebody who could be the father, somebody who could be the real Wong Fei-hung. Somehow didn't seem right to me. Having said that, there's now in Fat San, the famous hometown of Wong Fei-hung, there is a Wong Fei-hung museum. And Tsui Hark, the director of this film, was there for the grand opening, and they actually went to the trouble. They named me for some reason the internet. I guess I've talked more about Wong Fei-hung than anybody else. They named me like their international representative, and I got this wonderful kind of bust. It's like a little stone image of Wong Fei-hung, but it's based on this photograph. So I hope that Wong Fei-hung the sons actually look like their father. I think they should have done him as the statue should have been in the image of Kwan Tat Hing, because I think still in the minds of most Chinese, Kwan Tat Hing is Wong Fei-hung, and Jackie Chan and Jet Li are just playing Kwan Tat Hing as a young man. Here's the resolution of the shadow play. In the first film, there was a scene when 13th Aunt, when Sap Sami is fitting Wong Fei-hung for a Western-style suit, and she looks at the shadows on the wall, and that's the only way she can touch him because of social convention. And in the second film, he's teaching her kung fu, and she looks at the shadows on the wall and imagines that she could be dancing with him. And then in this film, we actually have a resolution where she can see their shadow on the wall of her embracing the man that she loves. And there's a wonderful moment in the second film, when she has to flee the burning embassy, and she says, "I know you always look at me and think of me as your 13th aunt, but you're always the man in my heart." And then here we have the resolution of that. And if you're ever going to believe that a woman loved a man, you'd believe that Rosamund Kwan loves Jet Li, or that Peony loves Wong Fei-hung. because she really has the most expressive eyes. And I never feel that Quan Chi Lam, Rosamund Kwan, is an actress of tremendous range, but the part that she's called to play, she really gives a sincerity to, and that's part of the fact that the completion here in the third film in the series, and this is really the proper the proper arc of the Wong Fei-hung films. The next movie, Wong Fei-hung number 4, another actor took over the role of Wong Fei-hung, and so they went off in a different direction. And people have asked me why Jet Li left the Wong Fei-hung series after the third film, and Jet Li himself has been very diplomatic in interviews and saying, well, he wanted the chance to work with other directors, having worked with Tsui Hark on a number of films. I think part of it is the same thing that you had when Sean Connery was playing James Bond. When you are the star of a series of that caliber, of that level, you probably feel at a certain point you need a bigger reward from your involvement than you're getting. And I think this was an issue, and particularly as the films are being produced by Golden Harvest, who are not known for being overly generous in the way they take care of the performing talent. So I think he felt that he could get a better deal elsewhere. And of course he did do a fourth Wong Fei-hung film for Wong Jing, and it made a lot of money, and I think he was a producer on the film. Meanwhile, Tsui Hark continued with the planned series. I mean, I think it would have been a different series had Jet Li stayed on board, but he cast another mainland martial arts expert, Chiu Man-juk, otherwise known as Zhao Wing-zhao, in the role. And for the fourth film, we didn't have Sapsam-yi. We had her sister, character played by Jean Wang, who was Miss Orchid in Iron Monkey, and she played another aunt, like the sister of 13th Aunt in Once Upon a Time in China 4. And then Quan Chi Lam returned. We had Rosamund Kwan as Sapsam-yi and Jean Wang as her sister in Once Upon a Time in China 5. And then for the TV series, which carried over with Chiu Man-juk, Rosamund Kwan wanted to keep doing films and was not going to commit to a TV series. So Tsui Hark brought in a very popular TV actress called Maggie Siu, who was the former girlfriend of Ekin Cheng Yi-gin from Storm Riders. And then again, Rosamund returned to the fold when they did a big kind of reunion movie, the somewhat disappointing Once Upon a Time in China and America, which was directed by Sammo Hung, and she came back on board for that. So she's had like a kind of quite a run for. They've had quite a run for their money with Rosamund Kwan as Sapsam-yi. And she's she had a kind of semi-retirement after she finished Once Upon a Time in China and America. She was in some high-profile TV ad campaigns, one for mobile phones with Andy Lau. And now she's back in a Columbia TriStar finance film called Big Shot's Funeral, which also stars Donald Sutherland. At the time of speaking, that's been finished but hasn't been released yet. So she'll be back on the screens before long. And here we have this kind of mass lion dance contest. You'll notice with the lions that despite the fact that these costumes, these mythical beasts are called lions, they don't actually look much like the actual physical lion. The reason for this is that the lion is not indigenous to China. In China they have tigers, yes, but they did not have lions. And the legend has it that during the Tang dynasty, which was from 618 to 906 AD, one of the Tang emperors dreamed that his life had been saved by a strange animal. And when he awoke the following morning, he described this beast to his ministers, who said, oh, well, this must be this famous creature from the West, the lion. And so the animal subsequently became a symbol of good luck. And that's often why, if you look at Chinese buildings, you see two stone lions guarding the front of a building. And the Bank of China building in Central in Hong Kong is a good example of that. It has two stone lions. But it seems that the Chinese version of the lion, as seen in the lion dance, is kind of a composite of all these different mythical beasts, because they have like a small bird-shaped horn on the forehead, which is inspired by the phoenix, and the ears and tail of a unicorn, the beard being the beard of the dragon. On the forehead they have a small mirror, often it's eight-sided, like a bagua mirror, which is to repel evil. And when the lion moves, it moves in a zigzag path to confound evil spirits, because as we all know, evil spirits only move in straight lines, which goes to explain a lot about British Rail. But the lion can zigzag and jumps and stamps to drive away evil forces. So the lion dance is basically an exercise to generate good fortune and to drive away the possibility of evil spirits affecting a business or any other kind of venture. They used to actually have lion dances at traditional marriages in China. But now in Hong Kong, even to this day, you would not have an opening of a business, a traditional Chinese business, or indeed a venture of any kind, without having a lion dance to ensure good luck. And just as you have northern and southern Chinese martial arts, the Lam Kun Bak Toi, you actually have northern and southern lion dancing. You have the Lam and Bak, Simo, the lion dance. And if you see the movie Martial Arts of Shaolin, one of the earlier Jet Li films, you can actually see the northern lion dancers. They wear kind of a full body costume. It's like a Muppet Show kind of outfit, a full body hairy outfit, like a pantomime horse. So that's the northern lion. And what we're seeing here is the southern lion. The southern lion has one dancer wearing the head, which is made of a kind of a lattice of bamboo and wires, with kind of textured with oiled paper stretched over it and then painted, and that's the head of the lion. And inside you have bamboo sticks and levers to move the eyes, the ears, and the different parts of the head of the lion. And then you have the tail, which is this strip of cloth behind, which has another performer behind it. So it's a totally different approach to lion dancing from north to south. But here we really see, even though we are in the north, let's say we're in Beijing, we actually see primarily the southern lions about to participate in a lion dance contest. And the rules of the contest are quite simple, in that there is a target, in this case this intricate ball, and it's the lion dance team who can maneuver using their stance and their martial arts skills their lion into the favorable position to seize the prize that they will win. And as we see, I mean, this can easily get out of hand, because traditionally lion dances were only performed by highly trained martial arts masters. There's actually the unicorn you see there a moment ago, with the differently shaped head and the very prominent point to the unicorn horn. But in recent years, because there's so much money made at Chinese New Year and various store openings and building openings by lion dance teams, you can make much more money doing lion dancing than you can teaching Kung Fu. There are groups that have been formed who only do lion dancing with any minimal involvement, if any, in martial arts. They just do lion dancing. Unfortunately, there's been cases in the past of teams of like triads or haksawoi in Hong Kong, that they've been lion dance teams who pretty much extort money. I mean, it's very bad luck. If somebody performs a lion dance outside your building, it's very bad luck not to give a donation, a red packet, a licee full of money to the lion dance team. So you can see that really lends itself to extortion, and that has happened. This idea of the dueling lions and these kind of spiked weapons was also played up in the Wong Fei-hung movie Last Hero of China, which Jet went on to make for Wong Jing, in which you had some very, like a centipede, lion, and all other weird and wonderful creatures. So it's kind of paving the way for it in this scene. With obviously there's been complete freedom on behalf of the lion designers as to what kind of hardware they can actually install to give themselves an advantage in the lion dance competition. But as I was saying before, there are groups, and in Singapore and Malaysia, lion dancing is very popular, and they actually have very extravagant lion dance competitions in which the different groups demonstrate their skills, performing on high poles, doing jumps. The guy in the back of the lion will balance, the guy in the front of the lion will stand on his shoulders, and it's really an incredible display of dexterity, and quite dangerous. I mean, people do get hurt falling off platforms and doing various tricky maneuvers as part of a lion dance team. But it's become like an art in and of itself, and slightly divorced now from traditional Chinese martial arts. And here's one of those beautiful romantic shots that you only get in a Hong Kong martial arts movie, when the lovers fly above the head of the dueling multitude. Don't know what the significance is of the wardrobe of Wong Fei-hung, but if you look in the different films, he's very different. Though he always wears traditional Chinese attire, it changes from film to film. In the first movie, he was wearing this kind of dun-coloured, kind of sand-coloured robe. And in the second film, at the beginning, we see him in a kind of a white, the memorable scene where he fights the White Lotus. He's wearing kind of a slightly lighter coloured one. And here you see him in this red robe. Maybe this is more something that would have been worn in the capital during this time. And here he is going into battle against the lions. And this is the different style that they really determined for this film, whereas in the first couple of movies you had these long, protracted one-on-one combat sequences where Wong Fei-hung is fighting against a single, highly skilled opponent. Here, he's confronted with more of a kind of continuity of danger and a continuity of threats, and has to use his skills in this kind of more spectacular setting. Coming up in this next sequence is a shot that was cut from the UK print of the film, which is when Greiger Chut kicks the leg out from a horse. And obviously, I'm not in favour of animals being hurt, but I wonder if they did the same thing with the animal being punched out, the horse being punched out in blazing saddles. I guess they're looking at context as well as anything else. Nice, this line dancing lends itself to some really spectacular action, and they're really taking it to the extreme here with fire-breathing lions and this wonderful stick action. Looking at this reminds me, there was a video somebody came out with. There's a martial arts action film, and there was a guy in there who's a stick-fighting champion, and he was telling everybody in interviews, this is the stick-fighting, check it out, you'll see, what stick-fighting looks like. And it just, technically I think it was probably very good, but it lacked power. You didn't look at him and go, gee, this guy's a really powerful stick fighter. You just thought this guy knows the technique. And here, and not when he's doing these more acrobatic moments, but when you actually see Jet using the weapon, that there's a rhythm and a timing to the way he applies it. This is how the stick will look on film. And if you want to learn choreography, I often think it's a good thing to look at a sequence where somebody's applying a weapon or a hand technique, turn the sound down, and analyze the editing and the camera angles and all the things that make choreography special. Just a moment ago, was the scene when he kicks the horse. We kind of see the power of Greiger Chut's kicking technique because he kicks the leg out from a horse. And we obviously don't want fans to go out and in the fields and kick livestock. So that little scene was cut there. But you do feel a sense of danger here. And this film has different things going on in it. At one level, and in a way perhaps emotionally the least engaging level, is the rivalry between the Cantonese Men's Association and the oil workers and the rickshaw workers, and these rival groups competing in the lion competition. On another level, you have the resolution of this the three movies where we've seen the romance develop between Wong Fei-hung and Sapsamyi. And on the third level, we have also really quite a touching story, which is about the redemption of Greiger Chut, because you have the character at the beginning of the film. He's very cocky, much like Hong Yan-yan. Hong Yan-yan doesn't lack for self-confidence. You have this very cocky martial arts expert come out and beats up on Wong Kei-Ying. And then he's obviously very arrogant and doesn't pay any respect to his fellow, the people who are even the members of the same group that he's a member of, and suffers this debilitating injury, is rejected by them. And then we see what happens later is his redemption, and he becomes a stock character in the Wong Fei-hung pantheon, and in fact has been since the early days. I mean, characters that he's never been depicted the way that Hong Yan-yan depicts him, but Greiger Chut has been a character since the old black and white Wong Fei-hung films, and indeed was played by Yuen Biao in the film Magnificent Butcher, and later in a film that was called Kickboxer. Yuen Biao played a character who was called Greiger Chut. And going back to the idea that Tsui Hark was looking for something different to do with Once Upon a Time in China 3, we'd never seen Wong Fei-hung work with animals before, with horses to this extent. And obviously that's something that's a lot harder to do if you're shooting in Hong Kong. But if you're in Beijing, particularly Beijing film studios, where they have access to all the resources to make these epic period films, it would be a shame to go up there and film and just do a film with the same kind of vision as you would do in Hong Kong. So he wanted to bring out the horsemanship of Jet Li and to employ a different kind of danger to kind of put Wong Fei-hung in a different situation. And this little moment here, this is the kind of thing you can sometimes skip over when you're watching a Hong Kong martial arts action film, because you're kind of looking for the next big throwdown. But I like this little atmospheric thing happening here, where there's a sense of something happening literally off camera. In fact, it's happening on camera, because these evil deeds are being caught by this in a way that, I mean, scientifically and logically could not be captured on film by one of these old-fashioned cameras in the way that it's depicted here. But it's a plot point, and you go with the flow. but the sense that there's something happening. Of course, the backstory, a lot of the times you can watch these films 2 or 3 times and not really get what the backstory is about, because what's happening in the foreground is so spectacular. But the backstory is that the Russians are planning to assassinate the Chinese president, Li Hongchang, and to use this to destabilize China and therefore impose a Russian-led European rule of the country. And at the end, at the end of the film, Tumanovsky makes like an impassioned plea. He says, well, before you Han people, the indigenous people of China, you resisted the Manchu rule, and now you've come to terms with it. And in time, you will come to terms with the rule of the European powers. And this may seem ridiculous now, when China is so evidently has its own identity and its own place on the world stage. But at the turn of the last century, China was indeed being divided up by the incredibly powerful military might of the world's powers, and it did seem this might be the future for China. It would be to be like a kind of a United States of Europe. This very atmospheric moment with the hat blowing in the wind and the camera that's kind of captured something that's just happened off camera, that's a key point to the conspiracy. And this is the kind of gentle touch that Tsui Hark brings to his filmmaking. And one of the things I appreciate about this film, that there's that same attention to detail. And I felt that, and I think I said this in a review talking about the progression of the series, that the first film, that the colors, the first 3 movies, the detail of the colors of it was like an oil painting. And as time passed, it became more like a watercolor, because they got more and more washed out, until you got Once Upon a Time in China and America, which I felt was very much washed out compared to the first Once Upon a Time in China. Another note to Tsui Hark in terms of verisimilitude was the fact that he actually got Russian speakers to dub in these scenes here, with the Russians conferring among themselves in this wonderfully ornate setting, and with these presumably authentic Russian uniforms. I'm no expert on Russian military outfits, but presumably, knowing Tsui Hark, they would have been the real deal. And John Wakefield, who plays Tumanovsky, doesn't speak Russian, so he was dubbed for these scenes and was speaking English, as were most of the players. Though they did actually find some native-speaking Russians in Beijing. At any given time, the Beijing capital always has people studying, people living and working in Beijing. The perception may be that it's a foreign country, but in fact, or that it's kind of an exotic place. But modern Beijing is a lot of fun, and it has a very large expatriate community living and working there. So they use those people to be in the film. And here we see Wong Fei-hung trying to make an attempt to learn English to move into the modern day. This is one of the scenes that's a little longer in the Taiwanese print. Speaking of reading and writing, the script for this film is by Tsui Hark and by a writer called Zheng Dan, who has a wonderfully politically incorrect name. His English name is Charcoal Tan. And I don't think you could get away with that name anywhere except in Hong Kong. And speaking of things that are politically incorrect, Jet Li himself has had a few political run-ins over the years. His first major international performance was actually on the lawn of the White House, where he performed Kung Fu for President Nixon when he toured as part of a team of mainland Chinese wushu experts. And after he displayed his skills, Nixon apparently came to him and said, "Oh, you know, through a translator, your martial arts skill is amazing." And some versions of the story, Nixon says, "Would you like to be my bodyguard when you grow up?" Some versions, he says, "Would you like to become the bodyguard of Chairman Mao when you grow up?" And apparently, even at those tender years, the young Jet Li replied, "I don't want to protect just one person. I want to protect all my countrymen." And when the answer was translated, there was a silence. Nixon didn't know what to say. And Henry Kissinger stepped into the breach and he said, "What a young boy, but already he speaks like a diplomat." So that was an early Jet Li scrape with a political situation. And then years later, after he made Shaolin Temple and become a very high-profile figure in China, I mean, China is incredibly complicated politically, and people can fall out of favor for an imagined slight, for some imagined insult. And this actually happened to Jet Li, that he fell out of favor with a certain political faction and had to go and lie low, had to pretty much go on the run. And he needed to find a way to rehabilitate himself, because when you fall out of favor politically, it actually is a dangerous time. Any thing can befall you or could befall you in China in that period. I mean, it's slightly better now, but it's still a huge country governed by this autocratic state. So it can be a dangerous place. He was in the situation, and he saved his career with a very good example of how you apply martial arts tactics to the real world. He attended a banquet which was held by the late Deng Xiaoping. And this banquet was being held for the benefit of a visiting foreign ambassador. I think it was the French ambassador. And anyway, Jet Li, Lei Ling-gi, wangled a ticket to the banquet and then unexpectedly got to his feet and approached the top table and proposed a toast to the visiting ambassador in front of Deng Xiaoping. And of course, Deng Xiaoping loved Jet Li, and I mean he was, and this was the only way that Jet Li could get close to Deng Xiaoping because of the fact that there was obviously a huge gap between the two of them politically in terms of their position. But Deng Xiaoping had no problem with Jet Li whatsoever, and so when it was seen on national TV that they were raising a glass together, it was assumed that Jet Li had been rehabilitated politically, that he was close with Deng Xiaoping, and therefore he was untouchable, and that was kind of how he avoided this particular problem that is unique, I think, to high-profile people in China. And here's a nice scene for Lao Shan, who's as I mentioned earlier, was formerly an exponent of the Chinese opera and a favorite of Tsui Hark. He's appeared in great character roles in Chinese Ghost Story 3, Swordsman, Dragon Gate Inn, recently in Legend of Zhu, the rather disappointing sequel or reimagination of Stuksan, Zhu Warriors from the Magic Mountain. And he was to reprise this role of Wong Kei-Ying in Once Upon a Time in China 4 and 5 and in the subsequent TV series. And he's really a fine character player. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his role in the film Swordsman, and I really think he should have been nominated here because it's a really a nice, and it works on several levels. I mean, he's an interesting, eccentric character, but there's a heart there in that he obviously cares about his son and cares about the fact that what's going to happen, what's supposedly happening, this marriage between Wong Fei-hung and Peony, goes against the conventions by which he was raised. So now we're kicking into the other of the subplots, which is the redemption of Clubfoot, of Greiger Chut. Clubfoot I think is a mistranslation because Clubfoot it's not a phrase that we use anymore, but it would be somebody who was born with a particular ailment that their leg was disfigured. So that would be somebody who had a clubfoot. But in this instance, he obviously at the beginning of the film, though he is kind of oddly put together, he's not crippled as such. And so this is something that happens in the course of the film. But he's known as Greiger Chut because of his extraordinary Gwai is strange, his strange kicking technique. And we saw in the earlier scene where he fights Wong Kei-Ying, he's kind of knocking back the other fighters from the same group with no respect whatsoever, including the fellow we see at the top of the stairs there. So when he finally falls from grace and is injured, he gets no mercy from them and is pretty much treated like a dog. And given the fact that this is a typical Tsui Hark reversal and a very smart way to play with the emotion of the audience, because he's built up Greiger Chut as being the main bad guy of the piece, so the audience is expecting, okay, at the end you're going to see him get his comeuppance. But in fact, we find ourselves sympathizing with him and feeling, his pain in this scene. And is something that I think in each of the films, the villain was never, in the first three Wong Fei-hung films, the villain is never a black and white villain. In the first film, with Iron Robe, he's somebody who is convinced that he can use his martial arts skills to make a place for himself, that he can become a man of power and respect in that modern era of China. And in the second film, General Lan, played by Donnie Yen, is somebody who is basically pursuing a political agenda which he believes to be the right one for China, albeit with a rather cold-blooded approach. And I mentioned earlier, this is like the industrial version of the Industrial Revolution version of Bo Chi Lam, which is the famous herbal medicine clinic founded by Luk Ah Choi. And the literal translation of Bo Chi Lam is precious iris woods, and it took its name from a famous couplet of Chinese classical poetry. And I will not offend your ears by trying to recite it because it's in Mandarin and my Cantonese is bad enough without my trying Mandarin. But the translation is, the precious sword is out of the sheath, the iris has grown into woods. And from this they took the precious precious Irish. That's what we were shooting in Highbinders. The precious Iris Woods. There's a terrific shot there. I mean, that's if you're in a movie for Tsui Hark, you want a nice kind of shooting upwards shot like that, and it's wonderful because it actually shows this Western man with behind him the great power of an industrial revolution. And I think that Wong Fei-hung's whole message in these films is China will change, we will change. What matters is that our principles and our ethics and our honor do not change, even though we embrace the new technology in the new century that's about to come, or is on the verge of coming at the time this film is set. We should mention the wonderful cinematography of the film, which is by none other than Andrew Lau Wakefield, who is now a director, a popular and successful director in his own right, and directed Storm Riders, Feng Wan, and A Man Called Hero, Zhong Hua Ying Hong, and he's like coincidentally editing his movie. I think the working title is Legend of the Fist Master in the studio next door to me as I am watching this. So I'd actually got to compare notes with him for a moment before I came in to do the commentary, and he actually showed me 10 minutes of Legend of the Fist Master, which looks neat. I mean, he is a prolific director, but great style, and I mean he really had a tremendous influence on the industry when he made Young and Dangerous, Guatjai, and then when he made Storm Riders. But at the time this movie was made, he was a cinematographer. Like many cinematographers, he went on to become a successful director. And this sequence particularly really shows his skill, because the whole thing, as you see, it's got this kind of blue light, which somehow is wonderfully suitable to the nature of the scene, because sometimes, I mean, cinematography is like painting with light, and the picture that you paint has to be in harmony with the poetry of the script. And in this instance, it's really about this character who's been brought low and then is about to be saved as a person by the goodness of this saintly character, Wong Fei-hung. And I would say, and people have said, the real life Wong Fei-hung probably wasn't like he's portrayed in these films by Jet Li, or was portrayed by Quan Tai-hing. To me, that doesn't matter. What matters is that you have this potent folk hero who embodies so much of what's good about the Chinese traditions, about the Chinese, the better part of Chinese philosophy, and he embodies it, the strength with justice, with rightness, with nobility. And he's a good hero for young people to have, and that's why I think it's really great that these films are coming out on DVD in a format that's been embraced by a younger generation, because people can take a look and see elements there that maybe some of the American action heroes don't have. I mean, I don't know there's great spiritual depth to your Rambos or Terminators, but certainly here, there's this principle of turning the other cheek, which people have made aspersions about as a Christian concept, but a universal concept, and here it is expressed. And it's touching because both these men have been or are incredibly powerful physically, but there's this really strong dramatic moment between them, and it's beautifully enhanced by Andrew Lau's cinematography and this kind of the blue setting and the rain, which has always been a hallmark of the Tsui Hark style when he's been directing these films. And a nice little moment there is like a coda to the scene. And bear in mind that earlier in the movie we see Greiger Chut has been beating the living daylights out of Wong Kei-Ying. So there's that forgiveness there. I love this moment here where they're like all telling each other that I love you, because this is a phrase that's been taught them by Sup Sam Yi, and everybody thinks it means something other than what it really does mean. This is longer in the sequence where they were shooting demonstrations was longer in the Taiwanese print, and the scene when they play back the black and white footage is longer in the Taiwanese version. And of course, there's actually no footage of the real Wong Fei-hung performing, but we do fortunately have black and white film of his real students doing kung fu, because if you look at the very early black and white Wong Fei-hung films, you've got performances by people like Chan Hon-chong, who is my own grandmaster in the Hung-gar style, who was a student of Lam Sai-wing, who was in turn a student of Wong Fei-hung. So you have kind of like that unbroken lineage And that's the wonderful thing about the black and white films, is that they can actually capture those demonstrations of martial arts as practiced in Hong Kong in the 50s and 60s that's captured forever by those old black and white movies. So I guess this is kind of a reference to that, because that was evidently the influence for Tsui Hark and John Woo and a whole generation of filmmakers, that they used to sit there. Even Bruce Lee would sit there in the dark in the theaters watching these films with Kwan Tai-hing and Sek Gin, and not just the Wong Fei-hung films, but the fantasy and martial arts action films of that period. And that influence, and you now got these big budget, colourful, energetic remakes of those classic Chinese cinema, Hong Kong action cinema archetypes. And Tsui Hark is somebody, I think, he is drinking from the water of this deep well of this very the broad tradition of Hong Kong action cinema. And it's not just kung fu movies with the Shaolin Temple, but you had all the cine fantastique films, and you had gangster movies and dramas and all these things. And so that whole generation were influenced by those films more, I think, than they were by the movies of Hollywood. Looking at Once Upon a Time in China 3 again, I'm really surprised it didn't get nominated for Best Cinematography, or indeed for Lao Shun's performance, or indeed for Hong Yan-Yan's performance as Greiger Chut for Best Supporting Actors. Instead, it was only nominated in one category for Best Editing, and even though the editing is exemplary, I think it has a lot to recommend it. I think one of the problems is that if you come in as the third, it was like with the Star Wars trilogy, if you come in the third after two highly regarded and incredibly popular films, and you're the third, you bring the third film out, you're living up to a lot of expectations, maybe unrealistic expectations of how good Part 3 is going to be. So I think a lot of the fact that people expressed disappointment with Wong Fei-hung number 3 was the fact that the first two films had set a standard. In their mind, the third film, in some way, had to feature a martial arts duel that would, top the one seen in the first couple of films. Tsui Hark evidently didn't feel that, and he wanted to look at other areas to make it more of a romantic drama with, on top of that, the line dancing, which is obviously something he wanted to explore visually and felt lent itself to a spectacular rounding out of this first cycle of the Wong Fei-hung legend, though he has gone back to explore it many times again. And also the villain here is nice because, he's like such a buffoonish kind of character. If they would only have had a one-on-one with him at the end, I think probably the Western audience would have felt the film was better structured, but that wasn't the story that Tsui Hark wanted to tell. Everybody wearing these robes in white here so that we get different colour schemes. The last scenario, when we saw the saving of Greiger Chut, it was a very blue theme, and now everything's white. I think it's the purity of the good people of the Canton Fellowship. And then for the next sequence, when they go, when Wong Fei-hung goes into the lion's den, or the dragon's den rather, goes into the dangerous area, it's darker and more menacing, the whole environment. And this is a nice moment, nice acting from Guan Chi-lam, as Subsanyi realizes that she runs the risk of coming between father and son. And so she decides to sacrifice her love and her feelings for Wong Fei-hung to preserve the relationship between him and his father. So that, again, that adds another texture, another level to the character. And you can do that because you've had the two previous films that have established who the character is and where she's coming from. So, full remarks to Tsui Hark. A lot of times people criticize Hong Kong action films and say that they are a number of very good action sequences strung together, and that there's nothing for the finer sensibilities, that they ignore drama, they ignore character development. And I would, hold up these three films, the Once Upon a Time in China 1 and 2 and 3, against any American-made action film series in terms of heart and soul and having a character art and character development. Now, this throwdown that we're about to see here is something I would say you'd only see in a Hong Kong martial arts action film, because it's such it's like a drawing room martial arts action comedy of errors. Because on the surface, you have the politeness of this greeting that this gentleman's coming to make peace, and then drinking from an empty cup. It's kind of a Bruce Lee principle there. And evidently, from that look, we can tell that Wong Fei-hung has realized that his wine is poisoned. And he has to find a way to dispose of it without offending his host. So he sets up the trip, burns this guy in the eye. My God, what was in that wine? And so now we go into this obviously a confrontation where you'd expect them to step aside and it's going to be a slam and a bang. We actually play again into this the kind of comedy of manners. Because in Chinese culture of this time, the way everything was done, a meeting, a confrontation, an argument, a meal, there was a certain established etiquette of way to approach the situation. So Tsui Hark is kind of playing with this here, whereas another kind of action picture might just have an immediate throwdown. You have this whole business with the table, which is a good example of how Hong Kong filmmakers can use wires with an inanimate object and spin it in the air, and how you would wire up the table to spin and stop and move at that precise moment without the aid of CGI or any other kind of visual effects trickery. It's a unique skill that's been developed by Hong Kong filmmakers. Now, this business here with the oil is an interesting twist, because in the old black and white movies, there was a film one of the films where I think it's Wong Fei-hung fights the five wolves, where Wong Fei-hung has to fight the experts of different martial arts styles. And in one scene, he's fighting like a Japanese wrestler played by Feng Yi, who played the Japanese sensei in Bruce Lee's Fist of Fury. And he rips off his jacket so that rips off his upper garments and covers himself in oil so that the wrestler can't get a hold of him. And then in Magnificent Butcher, Sammo Hung does the same thing when he's fighting with this crazy cat kung fu expert. So we're taking the principle here. Now it's been turned against Jet Li, or turned against Wong Fei-hung, where this oil is spread on the ground, meaning that he can't take his famous Seiping Ma, his famous four-step stance, which is the root of southern Chinese martial arts and is a key element of the Hung Gar style, the fact that you have this immovable horse. And so it adds another element of danger to this scenario, and we have to genuinely... It becomes increasingly hard when you've done two films with this martial arts Superman for Tsui Hark to find ways in which the audience can genuinely feel fearful for him. So here, rather than place him in a one-on-one confrontation with another martial artist, Tsui Hark makes the environment itself the danger. So earlier we saw him among all the lion dancers on a whole street full of rioting boxers. We saw him evading, being run down by stampeding horses. And now we see him in this slippery environment with all these blade-wielding opponents. And genuinely fear for him, because no matter how great a martial artist he is, every element of the environment seems to be against him. And of course, the trick with all these films, it's like the James Bond thing. We all know that James Bond is not going to die anytime soon in any of the movies, but it's how he uses his skills to get out of trouble that makes it entertaining. And certainly that's what we're seeing here. And the imagination of Yun Bun and his action team. I'd like to mention again also the contribution of Lau Wai-keung to this sequence, because I said earlier that cinematography can be described as painting with light. And look at the wonderful way that light's filtered through the netting behind the fighting, the combatants. I mean, this is the kind of thing where probably when you've seen the movie a bunch of times, you notice different elements, but you would notice it not being there, that texture that really gives some kind of depth to the scene. I mean, you could have the same choreography in a very muted environment, and the actual fight choreography would be the same, but the impression would be different because of the absence of the light that's being painted on the background. And I think it really is a tribute to Lau Wai-keung that each scene he comes into on this movie, he cooperates with Tsui Hark to illuminate the point of the sequence, and this is really to show the nobility and purity of Wong Fei-hung is able to let him to come out of the lion's den as he does here, and then has his guys on the run and out onto the standing street set, which is a key figure of the back lot at the Beijing Film Studios. And beautiful. This is actually what you could see this in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Redressed, obviously, from film to film, but they have an extensive period street set, which is much more extravagant than anything they could have had at Shaw Brothers back in the old days of kung fu filmmaking. And look at the dawn there in the background. You always get this because filmmaking, you've got not enough time, and they're shooting at night shoots, and you always get that last shot where you can just see the dawn in the background, and then you cut to another shot and it's dark again because they stopped filming and they came back the next night. And, I don't want to make fun because I've been there. It's so hard to make Hong Kong-style martial arts action films because two people talking, hey, anybody can do that in half an hour. But when you actually have protracted martial arts choreography, it's a very long and slow process, and how anybody can look down their nose at Hong Kong-style martial arts action or at martial arts action filmmaking as an art form, because it is very demanding and takes a huge amount of time. And he is the turning point of the relationship when we see Sapsami is willing to give up everything in order to for the future happiness of the Wong's family. And we know that she's leaving like her Dear John letter saying goodbye forever. I'm sure everybody watching the film knows there's no way that Tsui Hark is going to let her come out of the life of Wong Fei-hung. There's also a sense that not only have they been separated by family tradition, they're not only separated by the past, but also by the future, because Sapsami is somebody who, by virtue of her dress, her education, her interest in new technology, has embraced the coming century, whereas Wong Fei-hung often seems to be a man fighting to come to terms with it, because he's very much a product of tradition, both Chinese martial arts tradition and social tradition. So this is like the conflict between them, and the camera kind of symbolizes that, which she had in the first couple of films. She was using a stills camera in the first Once Upon a Time in China movie and the second one, and here she's progressed to using a prototype film camera. And film historians have told me that this kind of camera would not be available, and you would not be able what, where, whenever. Anyway, it works, and it's only a movie, and you either go along for the ride or not. And this next scene is really pivotal, because you have three characters changed in an instant, because you can't believe that the Wong Fei-hung of the first film would be able to respond with the pure emotional reaction that he exhibits here, as he realizes that the love of his life is about to walk out on him. And then he comes looking for her, and he's so desperate, because even though he is this martial arts master, he has like the heart of a man. The realization there from Wong Kei-Ying of how much they meant to each other, that she was prepared to give up Wong Fei-hung because of their relationship, that between father and son. And then he sees her, and the fact that he's running forward like this, you can't imagine him doing anything impetuous in his life before this moment when he's like, yes. And there's shock, oh my God, it's his aunt. There's no blood relationship between them, but socially it can't be. And then finally she can like dance with him, hold him in her arms. And there's that great comedy shot where he's slightly tilted. And then the resolution of the Wong Kei-Ying character, which is like the beautiful coda to the scene, when one of the older guys says, what do we do with all the old lion heads? And he says, we put away all these ancient things, basically embracing the fact that it's a new age, and sometimes we have to put away the past if we're going to embrace the future. So it's a nice underplaying by Lao Shan, because it's a gentle moment, and this beautiful shot, really, this would be the great ending shot of this romance between Wong Fei-hung and Sapsami. But of course the story continues, because there was further films in the series, and there was the TV series. At the end of the TV series, not to give out any spoilers, but in the last episode of the TV series, the Sapsami character, played by Maggie Sue, is actually killed off. And this actually does reflect the bad luck that the real Wong Fei-hung had with his wives in his real life, because several of them died young. So that was Tsui Hark's kind of rather sad finale to this love story. But I like to think about that. I like to think of the love story ending with this film, with Once Upon a Time in China 3, because I'm just an old romantic. Final note on the place that Wong Fei-hung now holds in the hearts of the mainland Chinese people. There's actually two Wong Fei-hung museums, one in Fatzan, which is the bigger of the two, and also one in his birthplace, or his supposed birthplace of Saichu, which commemorates the career of both Wong Fei-hung and his father, Wong Kei-Ying. And it's interesting the way, I think it's because of obviously the success of the films, that these regions have embraced Wong Fei-hung as a folk hero. I mean, for many years there really wasn't anything in Fatzan to commemorate Wong Fei-hung. They were more focused on Wing Chun, which was the other famous export, the Wing Chun Kung Fu style, which Bruce Lee studied when he was a youngster, and which he, I guess, made famous worldwide. Also originated in Fatzan. So that was really the most, apart from its position as like a famous trading port and industrial area. The famous thing about Fat Sam was Wing Chun came from there. Now, after the success of the films, there really have been major steps to embrace Wong Fei-hung as their native son. So here we come into the big finale, which is the lion dancing sequence. So I'd like to talk a bit more about lion dancing because I'm aware of the fact that it's really not something that is too widely seen in the Western world, and obviously this DVD is really aimed at the European market. The lion, as perceived in the lion dancing, is kind of a mythical beast who symbolizes courage, energy, and wisdom. And there's a ritual that happens whenever you have a lion dance to commemorate the opening of a building or any auspicious occasion, where some notable will come forward and be given a very special brush and a little cup full of red paint, and he'll dot the head and the eyes at specific places, which kind of breathes life into the lion and wakes up the lion for that specific occasion. The idea originally was that the lion would be built by a master lion head builder and then would be prepared and then would not be used until that ceremony had happened. But now, as a kind of to add to the auspicious nature of every occasion, they have somebody actually reenact the awakening of the lion. And there are 5 colors used on the traditional lion: black, red, green, white, and yellow. And these represent the lion's mastery of 5 directions. The 5 directions are north, south, east, west, and also center, which is the position where the lion is actually placed. And lion dancing is always accompanied by music, and the most important of the instruments used being the lion drum. And they also have large and small cymbals and a gong. And firecrackers, which we just saw being ignited by the president, which is a familiar sound to anybody who's been at any Chinese New Year celebration around the world. Firecrackers going off is the equivalent of the fireworks going off for the 5th of November in England. And the traditional lion dance, which what we're seeing here is kind of competitive lion dancing, an exaggerated competitive lion dancing with the different teams competing to get the gold emblem that's placed at the top of the bamboo tower. But the traditional lion dance enacts a story, and we have the lion performers enact a lion sleeping in a cave. And then you have a fat and smiling Buddha, or like a Buddhist monk, who is like somebody in Buddha's robes with like a papier-mâché smiling Buddha head on. He comes and sweeps away the dust and the leaves and lights candles and incense, then wakens the lion with a drum and gong. And then there's a whole play that follows of specific movements of an interrelation between the Buddha, the smiling Buddha, and the lion. And this ends when the monk or the Buddha feeds to the lion the greens. And greens is like a generic term, but normally it's a head of lettuce which is placed in a high position, and so the lion has to perform various acrobatic feats in order to seize the greens. And obviously there's also normally attached to the green now is a red, which is the red packet or the lycee which contains money, which are the green, could be greenbacks, and it could be, give me some of the green folding stuff. But anyway, that's the tradition of of lion dancing, and different lion dancing teams do different interpretations of it. And again, this is based on my own experience and research, and if your particular martial arts school does lion dancing a different way, great, you should do that, May 1,000 flowers bloom and 1,000 school of thoughts contend. And the different stages of the lion, basically, the lion performance, are divided into 6. The lion wakes up, lion chases its tail, the lion bowing, the high walk, which is normally a lot like what we're seeing in this sequence, when the guy behind will lift up the dancer who's got the head of the lion so that they're like standing in an upright position. There's the low walk, and then the final getting of the green, the seizing of the lion's target, the seizing of the lion's prize. Of course, normally when you see that kind of lion dance being enacted for auspicious reasons, you would not get this kind of action happening of blades, though it does happen sometimes. My own instructor in England, Jim Uglow, actually had a confrontation with a rival lion at a lion dance in Manchester, and there's a great photograph of him executing this perfect kick. It was half in play, but I think he was showing them who's boss, and good for him. But no blades, thankfully. Everybody was very well behaved. And this sequence, runs pretty long anyway. Great spectacle. In the Taiwanese print, it runs even longer. there's even more of this action and this colourful spectacle filling the screen. And I was mentioning before that the actual lions, I mean, obviously we have like stunt lions here and different constructions of lion, like this one with the burning sticks attached to make him more of a formidable opponent. But traditionally, the head of a lion is a relatively basic construction of bamboo lattice work and wire with kind of enameled paper placed over it, and then that's painted on to, and it has further bits of cloth and material and fur and other elements put there in a very traditional way to bring out the character of the lion. And you'll see in this scenario, not all the lions look alike. And actually the different lions, by the painting of the lion's head and the different colours, you can actually tell things about the character and the influence of the lion. For example, a black lion is a fighting lion. So if you see a black lion coming out, it would normally be, in traditional circles, it would be for a challenge, to challenge somebody else's lion to a duel. The flower-faced lion, which has like a white beard and more colourful accoutrements, that represents the calm maturity of a lion. And you have a lion that's influenced by a famous Chinese folk hero legend called General Guangong, and that's the red-faced, black-bearded lion, because Guangong is always depicted as having a red face because he washed his face in a stream and his face became coloured by the blood of his enemies. And he's now you often see in police stations and in gambling halls little altars, and on them the statue of a character in green robes with a red face and a black beard, and that is indeed Guangong. And the yellow lion actually represents another character from that same pantheon, who is Guangong's older brother, General Lao Pei, who was known for being brave and kind. So those are the attributes of the yellow-headed lion. And if you have one with a black face and black beard, then that does, I mentioned earlier, as a fighting lion. It represents the ferocity and the indomitable spirit of the younger brother of Guangong, who was General Chang Fei. And of course, these are all characters from the mythology than the history of China, but they are represented in the different forms of lion dance. And lion dancing, the Southern Lion really gained popularity during the early years of the Qing dynasty, when there were Ming patriots who were trying to overthrow the Manchus who usurped the rule of China, and they wanted to restore the Ming dynasty. And there was a famous saying that if all the Han people, the indigenous people of China, would raise one finger, they would be able to overthrow the Qing and restore the Ming. And that's the origin of a very significant gesture that we see in the Hanggar style, which is a style that I've studied over the years, when you extend your hand with a single finger raised, the forefinger, I hastily point out. And this signifies this idea of raising one finger to save the nation. So the Southern Lion actually gained its popularity, and lion groups were actually comprised of rebels. And they would use their performances to exchange information or raise money for the rebellion. And of course, in the end, none of these rebellions were actually effective, and the Qing dynasty did persist until 1911 and the foundation of the Republic. And I was talking earlier, just to set this film into its historical milieu, that Tsui, the Dowager Empress, had been ruling China in place of her 5-year-old son, Tongqi, and increasingly the Western powers had influence over China. Eventually, the teenage Tongqi died, supposedly of smallpox, but probably of venereal disease. And there's actually a Category 3 film called Sex and the Emperor, which describes in graphic detail the fall from grace of the alleged fall from grace of the Emperor Tongqi. And Tsui, of course, had by that time been ruling China for some time and wanted to hold on to power. So she chose her 3-year-old nephew, Kwangshu, to be the new emperor. And but against her wishes, he grew up to be somebody who wanted to modernize China and took steps in that direction. But he was kind of stymied in his efforts by the fact that Tsui had so totally mastered the intricacies of life within the Forbidden City, this huge fortress which held the imperial families of the Ming and Qing dynasties, and 24 emperors had ruled out of the Forbidden City for more than 500 years. And at one point they had like 70,000 eunuchs within its walls, eunuchs being people with incredible power in the court. Donnie Yen plays a very powerful eunuch in Dragon Gate Inn. But against that kind of opposition, Kwangshu was powerless, and he eventually was placed as a prisoner in a palace on a lake, an artificial lake called the Winter Palace Lake. And so his this palace revolt by Tsui put her back in command, and she maintained control of China through the infamous Boxer Rebellion of 1900, which saw 19,000 foreign troops marching in and conquering Beijing. And you can see this in the movie 55 Days at Peking. Peking being the old and politically incorrect now name for the Chinese capital. Now we call it Beijing. For many, many years it was the pinyin romanization was Peking. And Tsui, after the rebellion was over, returned to Beijing, was allowed by the foreign powers to return and institute reforms which were beneficial to the foreign powers, which is why I myself feel this film probably takes place after the Boxer Rebellion, because it's evident that there is great influence by the foreign powers in Beijing, which earlier Tsui had fought to oppose, and indeed had imprisoned her own chosen emperor because he had kind of tried to cooperate with the West. The Boxer Rebellion forced cooperation and leads to the situation that we see here in this film. And Puyi, the person who would be the last emperor of China, played in the film of the same name by John Lone, was born in 1906. And Tsui, the Dowager Empress, finally died on November 15th, which is coincidentally my birthday, in 1908, and ended this period of China. She was kind of demonized in the film 55 Days at Peking, but as I mentioned earlier, Sterling Seagrave's book Dragon Lady offers a more balanced view of her place in history and explains perhaps why she has been depicted in this light by her critics. Meanwhile, back at the action, you see again this idea that rather than facing a single superpowered martial arts foe, we have Wong Fei-hung in an environment that is of itself highly dangerous, and having to use his normal combination of incredible martial arts skills and courage to survive and to uphold the principles that Wong Fei-hung always fights for, which are fairness and courage and justice for all. And you couldn't ask for a more magnificent backdrop than the Beijing film studios. There's another lightening sky. Always tough to shoot action scenes at night because you run out of time so fast. It was a problem we had when we were shooting high this in Ireland, because it gets night. It gets dark very late and light very early, so you only have a few hours in which to shoot. And sometimes in various times of year in Beijing, it's similarly. You find there's very few hours of pitch black in which to film night shoots, and you end up scrambling to get shots before the dawn breaks. This is an incredible sequence to choreograph. And if you consider the fact that at this time, 1993, they very rarely used storyboards for Hong Kong films. I mean, everything pretty much was shot on the cuff, and the choreographers, in this case Yuen Bun, would be thinking in like 3D and working out how to coordinate the action in this kind of three-dimensional environment. Most martial arts fights happen two dimensions, guy on the left, guy on the right, and they're trading techniques. Here you have all these different composite elements. Away from Yuen Bun's contribution, you've got like Tsui Hark, who's balancing the political nature of this, that we have this fight to the finish that's been brought about by the rather arrogant Dowager Empress and her ruling elite as like a contest between Chinese. And at the same time as the side plot, you have the fact that the Russians are planning to assassinate the Chinese president. And Wong Fei-hung is so involved in his battle with his Chinese rivals that it's left to Sup Sam Yi and Leung Fun to prevent the assassination of the president. And I think it's interesting that these films, Tsui Hark very rarely brings out a stereotype. Everybody has their agenda. I mean, even Tumanovsky, the character played by John Wakefield, even though he is the villain of the piece, he is somebody who at one time was capable of finer feeling, because there was a romance between him and, or at least the beginnings of a romance between him and Peony. But there is a sense that he is purely acting in the best interests of his government and in his own way is a patriot. And there is even a pathos to his death scene, rather than bringing out villains who are going to be purely black and white cardboard cutout bad guys. And again, nice use of light here by La Wai-Kang in the cinematography for the scene. And I was talking to John Wakefield about the shooting of it. He said this hat which seems to have escaped from an old episode of Doctor Who, was constantly a problem because Tsui Hark was trying to find ways to frame the shot so that the hat did not become the centerpiece. And a few times he would be casting aspersions about John's parenthood. And unfortunately for John, and fortunately for Tsui Hark or vice versa, John actually understands Cantonese, so he could, unlike many Western people working on Hong Kong pictures, he could tell when Tsui Hark was talking about him and using foul language. But took it in his stride. He's a very cool character, is John Wakefield. And this sets into motion a perennial problem that martial arts pictures have when they're shot in the modern day more even than this kind of film, which is a period piece. But the fact that we do now have widespread firearms throughout the world, so empty-handed combat, or even combat using bladed weapons, is less effective than in previous eras. So in all of the Wong Fei-hung movies, the principals have at one stage or the other come up against the firepower of the foreign foe. And in the first film, Wong Fei-hung #1, you saw Iron Robe Yim, wonderfully played by Yam Sai-gun, is gunned down at the end, and his dying words are, we cannot use our kung fu against the foreign guns. And in the second film, we have the character played by Kung Dawei. David Chang's character is killed off by the villain using a gun. And here, again, Tumanovsky is armed with a gun, and they're going to plan to use a rifle hidden in a camera to shoot the Chinese president. The benefits from shooting the president are never really spelled out, but, presumably it's chaos in China and increasingly the Russian influence in the capital. And here's a terrific scenario set up here with the floating illuminated lantern, which contains within it the golden seal that's been placed there by the government as the prize for whoever will win the day. And he's putting on his miniature lion head, because you have to wear a lion head if you want to catch the seal. Wong Fei-hung takes flight. And, of course, all of this stuff is totally against the bounds of reason. But then when you look at something like the Cirque du Soleil, and if you imagine somebody with that kind of ability functioning in turn-of-the-century China, that's Wong Fei-hung. Because all the stuff that he does is unrealistic in that respect, but then so is what you see in the Cirque du Soleil, and the reason that it happens is that the performers have spent years practicing a specific craft. So in Wong Fei-hung, you have somebody who's a master of all crafts for the purposes of the film. And now the shot's gone awry. I would have thought that a night of carrying that damn hat on your head, you'd get a pretty stiff neck. That's a pretty impressive bit of headgear that the Russian guy's got. And now Greiger Chut, he has the ball and he's running with it. That's the Any Given Sunday shot. And then they have to find their gunman on the grassy knoll. They have to find their patsy, and in this instance it's going to be Tumanovsky. And typically wonderful editing and timing of the whole sequence as Tsui Hark kind of covers the bases as the lantern goes spinning past to attract the gunplay, and then the death of Tumanovsky and all the heads turning. Some pretty bad acting there from our Western extras. And I mentioned earlier that Tsui Hark doesn't have any characters who are black and white in his films. So you have this moment of pathos here after the death of the Russian villain. And there has been a romantic interlude between him and Peony that's happened before this film begins, way back before the first film began. And so she gives him his epitaph, that the new world is coming, but he will not live to see it. So he's not completely without his redeeming qualities, because at one time there was that emotional connection between them. And then the classic Wong Fei-hung pose. And the main villain coming out here. And this is actually quite a display, because working with a single pole in a fight is a much lighter weapon. But here you've got all this kind of these different elements on this, and you've got to spin it through the air in perfect timing with your opponent, with the background in motion. It's quite a complicated sequence. And again, in playing with what the theme of this film has been, which is to show martial arts action in an extravagant and fantastic setting. So even the weapons for the finale, for that brief exchange, they are these really elaborate lion dancing poles. And there's the sky lightning behind Jet Li again, and this guy, and you can just see this one coming a mile away, in that he's such a sleaze bag. And boom, 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 the Mo Yin Guk, shadowless kick, classic technique of Wong Fei-hung style. And as ever with Wong Fei-hung, from the black and white films to today, you never see a film where Wong Fei-hung willingly kills or cripples an opponent. So he leaves the defeated foe to be carried back to his lair. And then this wonderful moment here where it's really a statement of the individual in a society in China at that time where the individual, in the person of the emperor, had huge power, but in the person of the people had none. And Wong Fei-hung coming out to make a statement that government needs to be with responsibility, and that the strength of the nation is in the strength of the individuals, the strength of the people. So he comes and actually lectures the general, which he would not be allowed to do, I think, historically in any kind of realistic setting. But dramatically, it's a great moment because you've seen all this chaos and bloodshed, and the guy said, "No, stop him." But no, the government, the ruler wants to hear. And we have this great moment, the field of battle, this kind of carnage behind Wong Fei-hung. And this shot that's very similar to the one at the beginning of Once Upon a Time in China 2 with the White Lotus cult. And it defined, I think, the interpretation Jet Li had of the character and brought this trilogy to a fitting, dramatic and epic conclusion as he throws up the medallion. Boom! And turns to stalk away. He's made his point. And the music swells. We hear the famous Under the General's Orders, the Wong Fei-hung theme that's been the theme of Wong Fei-hung ever since the 1930s, the 1940s. That's been the music of Wong Fei-hung. And here, the sequence that didn't actually make it into the film of all this lion dancing in the Forbidden City. And I know Once Upon a Time in China 3 isn't necessarily everybody's favourite of the Wong Fei-hung films that Tsui Hark has done. But I think it has a lot to recommend it. There's a lot to really enjoy about the film. And I hope I've given you a fresh perspective by looking at maybe the historical context and the cultural background of the lion dancing and some of the things we've talked about. So that maybe you have a fresh appreciation for the film. Certainly, I think the whole film watched back to... I'd love to see the films in a theatre, Once Upon a Time in China 1, 2, and 3. It's just a wonderfully complete trilogy. And it's been great seeing Once Upon a Time in China 3 with you. It's always a pleasure. This is Bey Logan here in Hong Kong, in the studio, signing off. Joy Gin, sayonara, and goodbye.